When the famous actors, musicians, and athletes of the 1980s wished to cement their place in American pop culture, they turned to celebrity photographer Harry Langdon. One by one, he would direct their gaze into the camera, with their heads backlit in a glowing halo. It was a look so many celebrities of the decade sought that one could hardly call themselves a star if they hadn't been photographed by Harry Langdon. But in 1984, a man named Dr. Frederick Lenz commissioned Langdon for a series of photo shoots. The glamour shots that resulted began to appear across California, on college campus poster boards, newspapers, and magazines, frequently filling up the entire printed page. But it was unclear who Dr. Frederick Lenz was.
Well, by now, probably most of you have seen this photograph of this man.
Some of his portraits would pose questions. Others, Dr. Lenz would devote to listing his past lives, where he'd been a Japanese Zen master and a Tibetan Lama. But his most widely circulated portrait would feature only his face, along with a simple call to action: meditate with Rama.
Hi, my name is Rama, and today I'm here in the middle of eternity, where I am every day. Thousands have become familiar with the gentle expression and halo of luminous hair that has become the trademark of Zen Master Rama.
You believe Dr. Lenz is enlightened?
Yes, I do.
Fully enlightened?
Dr. Lenz seemed to appear out of nowhere, brute forcing his way into the public consciousness. To the casual observer, his visibility campaign seemed nothing more than an advertisement for meditation classes. But to his hundreds of already existing students, his face was meant to reach those who'd been followers of his for centuries, reminding them of who they really were and calling them back to him in order to finish their liberation.
We need to scour the globe for his students and reunite them, because we need to save the world from some unknown evil, or the evil of the world.
For nearly 2 decades, Dr. Frederick Lenz would attempt to corral his followers and lead them across America, away from the critics and away from family and friends who were desperately trying to find them.
Lenz was a clever liar. He was entertaining. He presented himself as successful. And this kind of loose Buddhism that he offered was appealing to a lot of young seekers that wanted to make money and be like him.
In order to complete their liberation, each follower must master not only the disciplines of the ancient world,
One more time, come at me. Come.
but prove their supremacy in the modern world by climbing to the top of America's most profitable industries by any means necessary.
Most of them didn't know anything about coding. Sometimes they'd get caught, put on literal blacklist because they were destroying code.
To find out what it was like to be inside, I spoke with a former follower who joined Lenz's organization when he was 20 years old.
Like, if you were to ask, like, how deep did I go? I looked forward to jumping in front of a bullet to save him. I looked forward to that. I was like, I can't wait till his life is on the line, and I'm the one who gets to save him.
And one of Lenz's most committed public detractors who threatened to take it all away from him.
How many followers of Frederick Lenz did you attempt to deprogram?
It had to be at least 25.
How many of those would you say were successful?
I think all but 4.
This is the story of Dr. Frederick Lenz, or as he was better known, Zen Master Rama.
It was a psychological, potentially arguable, physical abusive relationship with this guy. It was not as it was presented.
I'm a teacher of enlightenment. That is to say, I'm enlightened, and I enjoy being a vehicle of the expressions of the universe.
How did you happen to meet Frederick Lenz?
It started in college, where I was in my senior year, and I saw on the walls of my college these beautiful, shiny posters about learn how to meditate from the Boston Meditation Society. So my fiance at the time and I went to one of these classes, and at first they talked a lot about we meditate so we can find enlightenment. We can be calmer and more connected spiritually, and what historically those who have found enlightenment, like true enlightenment, look like in our historical art. This sort of golden glow in the paintings, right? And so some of us who are spiritually sensitive enough, when you're around one of these enlightened beings, you can actually see the golden glow. and I'm kind of nerdy. So afterwards, I would kind of go up and ask him questions and just say, historically, what was it like with blah, 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 blah. They were like, listen, we can tell that you are sort of, you vibe, your aura or whatever vibrates higher than most people. You must have studied this in past lives. Listen, we follow one of these guys that we believe is enlightened. And we'd love you to check him out. There is going to be a $500 a plate dinner in New York. And they were going to pay for the whole thing. They were like, listen, we've got so much from this guy we follow named Dr. Frederick Lenz, or what we call as Rama. We've gotten so much from him, we want to give back, and we make tons of money. So we're happy to pay your way. And we were like, okay, because we're like 20. We all drive down together. We go to this place, and there's like 200 or 300 people there, all in tuxes, and a lot of them are doctors and lawyers and computer programmers and computer programmers and computer programmers, which I noticed sort of a pattern in all of that. And then this tall guy who has sort of like blondish curly hair, kind of like this, but bigger. At some point, I saw him in like a leather jacket and like, Ray-Bans. And he did like a 5-minute monologue stand-up routine.
In other words, meditation has been turned into a tool of the bourgeoisie. No, I'm sorry. It's the wrong incarnation. I get, I'm in different ones at different times, and I got to bring it around and get it straight. Sorry, this is the right America.
And then he said, okay, everybody, we're going to dim the lights and let's meditate. For those who haven't been with me before, don't close your eyes like you usually do. Just like have a soft focus on me.
Then open your eyes a little bit and watch me meditate. You're not just watching me, the body. You're watching the energy fields here. You're relaxing your eyes, not looking too sharply, gazing, and just watching.
He just closed his eyes and he was doing a thing. I don't remember. And within 30 seconds or a minute, the whole room glowed gold, and I got this wave of euphoria that I never experienced before. I was like, oh my God, if this dude can do that as an enlightened being, in minutes, I'm in for life.
This man can turn a room gold in 60 seconds, read one of Lenz's Bay Area advertisements. Imagine what he can do to you. It's a claim that would be echoed for years.
Turns the room gold. That's all you see is gold light. Kind of like if you looked into the sun and squinted.
Even decades later, it's difficult to find discussion of Frederick Lenz without someone mentioning the golden light. But not everyone had such a theatrical introduction.
What was it then, Annie, that made you go, wow?
Well, first of all, I didn't go, wow. I listened to his presentation. I thought he was witty. I thought he was a nice person. And I resonated with things he said. Then he said, let's meditate. And I had a good meditation. I had a very good meditation.
Dr. Lenz's brand of meditation was not unlike what was already beginning to catch on in the West, with the goal of achieving better focus and control over one's emotions by quieting the mind.
Our mind is always in motion. You'll notice you're always thinking something. You're worried about tomorrow, paying the bills. We're thinking, images are flashing through our mind, seeing somebody you'd like to see, remembering something that happened in the past, our desires, our feelings, feeling guilty, feeling expectation. Meditation is the opposite of that.
The basic technique is learned in seconds. A student focuses their attention on the rise and fall of their breath or a place on their body. Keeping eyes closed is common, although Lenz often asked his students to look in his direction, a technique he called gazing. And when random thoughts intrude, the student gently brings their attention back to the focal point.
I would wake up at like 6 in the morning, which I'd never done in my entire life, and I would immediately meditate for 45 minutes. I was so motivated and focused. I was a 4.0 student for my last semester out of being a B- student forever.
I would like to teach you to look into the depths of yourself, and I'm afraid you're going to be shocked. You're going to find out that you're much more beautiful than you realize.
I suddenly started loving running. And so I would go for a run for 2 or 3 miles. I'd come back. If I didn't have school that day, I would work hard at work at Friendly's, scooping ice cream, but being super focused and being like the best I can be.
And that you can be happy even in the most adverse circumstances if you can do this one thing. Learn to make your mind quiet, still your thoughts.
Oh, and a lot of times I would meditate late at night and find that I really didn't need a lot of sleep. So I'd be working extra hard, reading books that he suggested I read on top of all of my homework.
Because then it's as if a curtain opens, and behind that curtain is light, ecstasy, perfection, beauty, and reality. There's nothing to be afraid of. There's only life, and we all live forever.
So it's hard for someone to go, I think you're in something destructive, because it doesn't look that way in the beginning.
But in 1989, a computer programmer from Oregon named Brenda Kerber, who'd been a meditation student of Lenz's for the past 3 years, went missing. Others would disappear soon after, as well as students cutting off contact with their families after they began attending Lenz's workshops. Reports even surfaced of students giving up custody of their children in order to follow the meditation group across the country.
My fiance and I, we lived together. We went to Boston to meet with one of the inner circle. And we had a dinner with him, and he talked about relationships and energy and stuff like that. And on the way home, we spontaneously, the both of us at the same time, realized we shouldn't be together because it's such a drain on our path to enlightenment. And we talked about, with glee, how we were going to split up all the stuff that we owned. It's like, oh, you can get the CD, those CDs, and these CDs will be mine, and those books and my book. It's like, do you want the bed or do you want the couch? She's like, I'll take the couch. And then a few days later, she was like, I don't want to leave. I really love you and I want to stay together. And I was like, oh, you're so silly. It's just going to destroy us.
So who was Dr. Frederick Lenz?
Supreme, supreme, supreme.
Frederick Lenz dedicated his first book, titled Lifetimes: True Accounts of Reincarnation, to an individual named Sri Chinmoy. In Lenz's second book, Sri Chinmoy received not only the dedication, but credit for the ideas presented in the book itself, disclosing that Lenz had been a student of Chinmoy's for the past 10 years.
Sri Chinmoy continues to astound with his Herculean feats of strength.
A guru, a genuine guru, really genuine, Sri Chinmoy.
Sri Chinmoy is our next guest on the program, and he is the holder of the United Nations Medallion for Peace.
In 1970s Queens, New York, there were few local figures that baffled the media quite like Chinmoy Kumar Ghosh, who'd adopted the honorific title of Sri before leaving Bangladesh for the United States. After settling into Queens, Chinmoy began putting his face on posters around college campuses, offering free meditation classes to the public. His following is nearly always described as increasing, and by the mid-70s, reporters found that he'd accumulated hundreds of students, most of whom were college-aged.
Little by little, as we meditate every day and we see him twice a week, I notice that I'm so happy and I feel God's presence so much of the time.
Chinmoy attempted to be a living example of what a focused mind, conditioned by frequent meditation, was capable of, and would invite local press to witness and perform endurance challenges, which he called creative miracles. The first was a 24-hour writing session where he produced 843 poems. This works out to about 35 poems per hour, or a poem every 100 seconds.
We just don't know if there is a world's record for the number of paintings done in the shortest possible time, but on tonight's edition of Bert Haney's People, he may just have found that man, a guru, living in Queens.
The pace of his second challenge was more frantic. 16,000 paintings in 24 hours, averaging now only a few seconds per piece.
I have no preconceived idea as to what I'm going to paint. I just allow myself to be carried away by a higher force.
It's hard labor as well as an act of love. Remarkable.
Through meditation, Chinmoy claimed to have achieved what he called a oneness with the Supreme, a type of psychedelic state he was known to spontaneously slip in and out of at all times of the day.
I noticed as you were meditating, there was rapid eye movement on your part.
My consciousness was flying from one plane of reality to another.
This facial expression Chinmoy adopted became the focal point of his group meditations, with students staring into the flickering whites of his eyes as they cleared their minds of thought.
Sri Chinmoy is like a visitor from this other world to this world to show his followers how to reach this other world.
At home, students would substitute with a photograph, as instructed by his 1978 meditation manual. Quote, "The best type of meditation comes when you enter into my consciousness by looking at a picture taken of me when I am in a high meditative consciousness, when I am one with the Supreme. Do not think of it as a picture of a human being."
There's never a second when you can't feel him. He's there with you like you're a guardian angel.
Chinmoy would soon have enough of a following to pack out event rooms, where he would take the stage, establish a oneness with the Supreme, and then deliver, to a crowd of thousands, a new creative miracle. In a single performance, Chinmoy would sometimes cycle through 100 or more instruments, improvising melodies with each one just long enough to channel the Supreme, before moving on to the next. By the late 1970s, Sri Chinmoy's multi-sensory meditation experience had extended far beyond Queens, New York.
There are over 125 Sri Chinmoy centers around the world. What goes on in them? What happens in the centers?
My students all over the world, wherever there are centers, they pray and meditate, and they read my writings. And also, as you know, I've composed thousands of songs.
Much of Chinmoy's success was owed to the recruitment efforts of his students, and old newspaper classifieds show that Frederick Lenz spent much of his early career as a traveling meditation instructor, leading workshops on behalf of the Sri Chinmoy centers.
Tonight, as we meditate together, I'm going to be moving in and out of different planes of attention and taking the Kundalini and surging it through you in a lot of different ways to show you inside what it feels like to meditate.
He went by Atmananda, one of the Sanskrit nicknames that Chinmoy had given to all of those in his inner circle.
I decided to study with Sri Chinmoy through Atmananda. He was the #1 disciple bringer for Chinmoy around the world. He was very good at it. He was a brilliant speaker.
Oh yeah, there's a definite battle between the light and the dark, yes. The network always wins, though. We run the galaxy.
What was he a professor of, and where was he professing?
He was a professor of American literature at State University of New York at Stony Brook.
So I can only suggest that you learn to be what my friend Theodore Rutke called a perpetual beginner. Because if you feel that you're knowledgeable, you may be. But to be a perpetual beginner is the happy part. Being a student is much more fun than being a teacher.
Lenz's experience as a professor gave him a natural ease and authority over his college-aged audience members. And as he traveled the country gathering recruits, he began to realize an opportunity.
He would give a lecture for Chinmoy to recruit people into Chinmoy's circles. At the very end, he'd be up there sitting cross-legged on the table, and he was channeling the guru's spiritual light. And he would look at people, and like spiritual light would come out of his eyes, he would say. Well, that's a big no-no, because that is up for the big kahuna to do, not for the little tiny Atmananda to do.
And by 1980, Lenz's workshops were no longer associated with the Sri Chinmoy centers, but sponsored by his own organization.
He took off with a handful of other Sri Chinmoy followers, convincing them that he was the one and the master has kind of fallen.
As I grew up spiritually, as I entered into Enlightenment, I saw the limitations of my own teacher, who was a very powerful occultist, but who I thought was, to some extent, limiting others in their spiritual growth.
Come with me, I'm the new enlightened one.
It wouldn't be easy for Lenz to rise out of Sri Chinmoy's shadow. Not only did Chinmoy have the adoration of thousands, he'd been hosting weekly meditations at the United Nations headquarters. Every Tuesday, his students could watch him slip into the Supreme in front of some of the most influential people in the world. In order to take followers away from Chinmoy, Lenz would need to establish himself as a guru of greater merit.
What did Frederick Lenz say he was offering his students?
So he was offering his students spiritual energy. At a certain point, I came to learn that we had studied with him specifically for hundreds or thousands of lifetimes. And we've all grown towards enlightenment because of working with him. And so what he was offering his students was spiritual energy.
When I sit with my students and meditate with them, I channel the Kundalini, the energy, directly into them. I bring them through plane after plane of consciousness. What they would do in 100 years of meditation, I can do in an hour with them.
This was the spiel. He'd give us spiritual energy. We would go home with that spiritual energy and meditate better.
And I take the Kundalini and I play against the notes with it. I kind of do a light show, inwardly and outwardly, with the energy, with vortexes of energy as you sit there, opening you up, opening up different parts of you that maybe you haven't felt since you were a child. It's no big deal. It's just what I do.
And when Lenz announced his separation from Chinmoy, it's reported that he was able to siphon about 40% of the students in attendance. But even without his star recruiter, Chinmoy's following only increased throughout the 1980s, and his students were beginning to perform creative miracles of their own. In 1986, the world record for most consecutive underwater pogo stick jumps was surpassed. The new champion used his platform as an opportunity to promote the Sri Chinmoy centers. Elsewhere in New York, a student shattered the record for continuous hand clapping with 50 hours of nonstop applause. And he did so, he said, to honor his guru. By 1982, Chinmoy claimed to have completed over 140,000 paintings, as well as over 4,000 musical compositions. Lenz would need his own way of showing the fruits of his enlightenment.
Now, I have written a number of pieces of music to meditate to.
I asked the Zen master, what is dancing? Dancing. Dancing. Dancing.
Zazen was Lenz's rock new age band. And he was credited as writing all the songs. And I would listen to them all the time. All the time. I mean, all the time.
It is the movement of life.
Lenz was joined by 3 of his students to form Zazen, and throughout the 1980s they produced a number of albums with tracks like Death is Sexual and Gandalf the Wizard.
I loved listening to it, but I was, controlled to love listening to it. It was actually fine music. It was perfectly good.
This music is composed in other dimensions. That's where I go to compose it. Then it's brought here into this world from the planes of light, and it's played by some of my students.
Chinmoy had become well known for drawing talented musicians into his orbit. Guitarists Carlos Santana and John McLaughlin both spent much of their early careers making music dedicated to the Supreme. Zazen was stacked with talent as well, with Grammy-nominated Joaquin Lievino providing lead guitar. and Lenz would incorporate this music into his live workshops, often using it as a focal point for group meditations.
Then I go through the music that they've played with my aura and wash out anything impure. So there's only light in the music. It's perfect music.
Students were asked to demonstrate their spiritual growth as well. Lenz required the submission of essays detailing each student's progress in their twice-daily meditations, and several supplementary disciplines such as the reading and rereading of recommended books, and martial arts taught by Sensei Lenz himself.
Martial arts is an ancient science. It was codified by Buddhist monks.
He would wear a gi, the karate white gi with a black belt. And they both looked like they had just come out of the package. They still had the folds all over them and stuff like that.
I will be extending an invisible energy field that we call the ki, that we gain from deep meditation and samadhi. This has rarely been seen outside of the Orient. There's nothing she can do. Is there anything you can do?
His inner circle would run at him and he'd go, ha, like that with his hands, and then they'd fall down.
What I want to do is interfere with their minds. The mind is the ultimate weapon. So they're going to come at me and I'm just going to project a wave of energy out of my body to disable them, right? Good, okay, come at me. Come. Say! One more time, come at me. Come. Say! For a moment, a wave of energy sweeps through their body, and they don't know where they are, what world they're in, what dimension they're in.
It's embarrassing. It's cringy, right? How bad it was. But man, did it look good when I was under mind control. Holy shit, that guy could move.
Lenz seemed to take the strictness of routine from Chinmoy, who frequently enrolled his students in marathons to advertise the center, and was known for waking his students up at 3 a.m. for morning meditations. But Lenz took what he called a Western-oriented approach to enlightenment. If students weren't progressing in their careers and increasing their salaries, they weren't making full use of his spiritual energy.
In this modern world, the more money you make, it's the better meditation you're having.
It's difficult to find a consistent membership price for Lenz's meditation group. The introductory seminars are usually advertised as either free or for a small cover charge. But as attendees became regulars, tuition could range anywhere from $600 a month to $2,500 a month.
I believe it was $20 a month.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that what you pay?
No, since then my career has advanced significantly, and I pay approximately $1,000 a month now.
For me, it started free, and then it was like a sliding scale. Like if you could pay $100 a month, $500 a month, that would be helpful. And it got to the point where I might have been paying $300 or $500 a month scrambling.
To cover the ever-increasing tuition, students were encouraged to switch careers, and at Lenz's suggestion, many of them turned to the fledgling field of computer programming.
A person who meditates who becomes a programmer is kind of like a duck in a happy pond. You're in the right situation for many, many reasons.
He believed, or he taught, that computer programming was very similar to really good meditation because of where your brain goes.
Computers are fascinating because the mindset necessary to work with advanced structures in programming and in design is exactly what we do in advanced meditation. It's exactly the same mindset.
I had credit cards at age 20, 21 that I was maxing out because of the promise of just in a few months, you're going to be making $100,000 a year, which was an unbelievable amount of money back then.
According to ex-followers, Lenz told his students that they'd all been software developers together in past lives in the lost city of Atlantis. And he appears to have registered a corporation under the title High Priest of the First Diocese of the Californian Church of Atlantis.
The computers in Atlantis were infinitely evolved. All processing was done with light. Electricity is much too slow.
But if his students had known how to code thousands of years ago, they would need a refresher.
If you're not familiar with the world of programming, you might take a simple course in it, and then there are two ways to plunge into it. One is to go to a short-term computer school where you go for 6 months or 9 months or a year, either during the day full-time or in the evenings.
He talked a lot about the importance of programming computers and artificial intelligence and relational databases, which is like a 3 or 4D database instead of like a flat spreadsheet, right? I'm a nerd, so I kind of understood it. And there were lots of people who were like, I don't know what he's saying, but they like worked really hard to figure it out.
Was Lenz knowledgeable about computer programming?
As far as I know, he was like a Steve Jobs. He understood the rudimentary stuff, but he was just trying to inspire people to go out and make a great deal of money.
Obviously, it's a smart career choice. It's our country's #1 business now, and it will only become more so.
But not every student waited until they knew how to code before entering the field. A pattern began to form of students packing out their resumes with proficiencies in programming languages and listing one another as previous employers who would vouch for them.
If you don't have experience, you come up with the names of some companies. Then you have somebody say, yes, they work for me there, a friend.
Most of them didn't know anything about coding, and they would use each other as references onto their resume and list all of the computer programming jobs they've had, which they never did, with the intention that they were going to do the best job they had, and they had this enlightened being's energy, so they should be able to persevere. So what normally would take 4 or 8 hours at their work, they would work 12, 14, 16 hours looking at books, copying code, doing all of this stuff that they could until they actually started understanding it, usually.
The girl that I worked with at Citicorp who was doing this was on the phone all the time with the other people in the cult, and she would use me as a source of information. She would ask me questions that were totally unrelated to her specific job. She was trying to help these other people. So basically it would be the blind leading the blind.
Sometimes they'd get caught, put on a literal blacklist because they were destroying code.
As one newsletter that circulated among the industry's hiring managers stated, Lenz's followers were, quote, inserting themselves virus-like on accounts in the tri-state area where they proceeded to wreak havoc. But not all who lied their way into these companies were exposed. Many learned the software languages quickly enough to begin rising the ranks into high-income positions, and they were advised to use this money to reinvest in their enlightenment.
You get more money, which tells you how more enlightened you are, and since we're simple monks, we give this money back to him as a gesture of thank you. And then he takes the money as the gesture, and then he gives us more spiritual energy, which lets us meditate better, to program code better, and then give him more money.
To study enlightenment requires a commitment, and part of that commitment is a person's willingness to go out and work to make the money to pay for their own way.
How much money do you think you spent involved with Zen Master Rama?
In cash layouts, for the 5-month involvement from January to May 1985, I gave out a little over $30,000 in cash.
And an exceptional person, of course, will pay even more, will give even more, because they not only want to just pay for their own way, but they wish to make enlightenment more available to others.
Because you were a spiritual student of his and you come to him and go, I have this great idea for a computer program or a database program, he would become CEO of every single one, like dozens of these companies.
Lenz credited himself with developing software through the 1980s and 90s that he claimed was used by hundreds of American companies, both commercial and military. And it's reported that some of his more successful programmers were providing Lenz with upwards of $5,000 per month each.
If I were to keep on going and had a full-time job out of college, I would have been paying as much as I could, $1,000 a month, which was a lot, $2,000 a month, and living with a number of other Lenz followers by sleeping on floors or packing into rooms, so we didn't have much overhead in eating ramen or just vegetables or whatever, and then giving him essentially all of our money.
Did he ever, in any of his seminars, verbally justify how he could ask that much?
Lenz would say that at his level and the amount of energy he had, there are so many people who want him dead, maybe from the government or these unknown evil people, or they just wanted to steal his energy. He needs to hide himself out and in plain sight, protecting himself in impeccable locations that sat on like vortexes or energy centers that the earth naturally gives, and also surround himself with other high-class things that energetically contain his energy and protect him from this dangerous world.
By 1988, Lenz was purchasing million-dollar homes across the United States in order to bring enlightenment to a wider audience.
I can work anywhere I want in the world. I can do what I want to, when I want to, buy or not buy what I want to, and I have a good understanding of art, literature, mathematics, geography, computer science, and the world. I know a lot about people. I'm not a bigot, and I try and help people out whenever I can. But I'm also street smart. I know the street real well.
By the end of the 1980s, Lenz had begun to elicit a fair amount of attention from journalists. LA Weekly published a several thousand-word expose, making it the centerpiece of the January 28, 1988 issue, with this illustration as the cover.
There's a newspaper in Los Angeles called the LA Weekly that ran a story called Busting Rama. I didn't know that there was anything to bust. I mean, I don't understand what the problem is. I teach seminars. They're very mainstream. I do them at Lincoln Center and every place else.
The authors interviewed several ex-followers for the expose, marking one of the first times Lenz was publicly confronted with the more extraordinary claims he had convinced his students to believe.
I want to see if any things are correct. Followers say that you make rooms glow with golden light. You can make the moon change colors, the stars spin, the wind stop.
We should all be so lucky. Sounds like they're talking about Jesus Christ here to me.
It does to me. All right, you deny having ever claimed any of this?
Of course not.
If you meet an enlightened person, you will see, if you have the ability to see on a subtle physical level, a beautiful golden light around them. Oh, you may see many other things.
You claim to be one of the 12 truly enlightened beings on this planet?
No, of course not.
In my estimation, at this time, there are 12 fully enlightened teachers in this world, of which I am one.
Lenz claimed to be one of the 12 enlightened beings on Earth. Do you know what he meant by that?
Yeah, people who have evolved for, incarnated for thousands of incarnations, who have studied Buddhism. At a certain point, you get to a point like a Buddhist or a Jesus state, right? Where you're so enlightened and connected to the universe that you're at the top.
Are you one of the 12 enlightened beings on Earth?
I am an enlightened teacher, and it would take about an hour to explain what that means.
Right. Who are the other 11?
Well, there's a very well-known gentleman in India called Satya Sai Baba, and so on and so forth. Names you wouldn't even know.
Wow.
It was almost a threat, if you think about it. If it's not him, there's a good chance you're not going to find the other ones. You really lucked out, or you were meant to find him.
Other claims include Lenz telling his followers that he could stop breathing while in deep meditation.
When you go into samadhi, very often you won't breathe for half an hour. There's no breath at all.
And something called blisses, this line of puppets that Lenz had imbued with spiritual energy.
What does this have to do with Zen Master Rama? Anyone want to just jump in here?
I can guess. It's fun.
I can guess. It's called a bliss, and you've got them in your apartment, and part of the things they do is get rid of demons. Question. Hold on.
But the most alarming revelation in the Busting Rama expose was what Lenz did to many of the women in the group.
We're not really having sex at all. It's an exchange of energy.
As a young man in Lenz's circle, did he treat you any differently from the women in the group?
I wasn't aware of it at the time, but the answer is yes. So what was happening behind the scenes was that he would pick out some woman or young woman and convince them that if they had sex with him, it's actually like a tantric way of him imbuing them with spiritual energy.
The greatest transfer, karmic transfer, occurs aside from in meditating with someone, in sex with someone.
He said that he had sex with many of his women students. It was strictly a spiritual exercise designed to energize me and raise my awareness level up to a higher realm.
I actually heard that some of his inner circle were convincing new people to do the same thing because they were higher than everybody else. I talked to one guy after the fact, after we were both out, and his girlfriend was one of those people, and they broke up because of it. And he left the group not because he didn't believe that he was unenlightened and he was a fraud. He actually left because this feels unequal, because there's no option for him to have sex or some equivalent with this guy.
Throughout the 1980s, much of Lenz's advertising campaign appeared to be aimed exclusively toward women.
He has somewhat of a radical, a very pro-women liberation point of view. Today he's going to tell us, as women, how we can attain greater enlightenment. Good morning, welcome to our show.
From a point of view of meditation, let's say that women have an inner power that men don't. We know that women's bodies are stronger than men. They can endure greater temperature changes, heat, cold. There are physiological differences. But from a psychic point of view, women just have a stronger energy. They can bear more and endure more.
By the end of the decade, Lenz had accumulated over 1,000 followers with a high-tuition inner circle of nearly 400 dedicated members. The group had spread over the country, with meditation bases in Palo Alto, Malibu, New York, and Boston.
You originally started in New York, you moved to San Diego, you asked people to follow you from New York to San Diego, you asked some of those people to follow you from San Diego to Malibu.
Now, I had a meditation center in San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. That's true. I've never asked anyone to move anywhere.
Did Lenz ever ask his followers to move or relocate with him?
Yes. There would be rumblings for a few weeks or a month or two, like the Exodus is coming up. You know, my first Exodus was when we went from Boston to Los Angeles or to Chicago. I can't remember the places. You would leave all your friends and family and everyone you ever knew like they were old clothes that don't fit anymore. When you show up to this new place, you're finally free of the past. You get to reinvent yourself. Instead of talking to your family members, you can give them their beeper number. So you're like connected, but you never respond to the beeper number. I was preparing for mine and saving money by living in my parents' house while I was working full-time to disappear to New York and just disappear, not even say goodbye. Gone.
There are certain places, we call them places of power on the earth. These are fabulous places. These are places where there's more energy available. For some reason, when you meditate in these places, it's easier to stop your thoughts.
There was a time limit hidden from the concerned family and friends who might be considering an intervention. If they didn't act quickly, they might lose the opportunity for good. But without an understanding of what these students were experiencing, many interventions went nowhere.
He asked, so, Mark, are you getting involved in a cult? And I said, no, Rabbi, I'm studying spiritual mysticism. And he sort of looked at me and he said, well, Judaism is a set of laws and we don't deal with that stuff.
What the students of Frederick Lenz really needed was expert intervention.
Would you mind introducing yourself and giving a description of what it is that you do?
Yeah, hello. My name is Joe Simhard. I'm known as a cult information specialist. Since 1980, I've helped people, families, the media understand the cult problem. I've done interventions that were called deprogrammings or exit counselings, approximately 500 or more. I also have a career in the fine arts.
Joe Simhard was a recurring voice of opposition throughout Frederick Lenz's career. In the late 80s, he publicly confronted Lenz on the talk show A Current Affair.
What does he do that creates such loyalty?
Well, for one thing, he sets himself up as something that he is not. A Zen master, an enlightened being, a person who can traverse in the occult world at will.
I do 2-night-a-month seminars that a person attends and may or may not attend again. I don't see how this race is a cult.
Joe's interest in this field came organically. Throughout the 1970s, he'd been a member of the apocalyptic Church Universal and Triumphant, led by the charismatic Guru Ma, who claimed to be, quote, God incarnate.
In unraveling that whole thing and deconstructing what I had been involved in, I became kind of an expert in the field of fundamentalist Christianity, New Age cults, fake Buddhism, self-help groups, all kinds of things that are related to this sort of activity. And deprogrammers and exit counselors got to know about me and asked me to go on cases with them. So I got, I guess, good at it, at doing conflict resolution with families that were impacted by this, and quite a few people would leave these cults after talking to me, sometimes for several hours, sometimes for a week.
When did Frederick Lenz first appear on your radar?
In 1986, a family called me from California complaining that their daughter had just got home and she was a mess, had been living with Frederick Rama for 3 months at his place in Long Island. They flew me out and I spent a week with their daughter, and she filled me in on Lenz's behavior. He had her take LSD, and she said during the first trip she ever did on LSD, he began to scream and yell at her for failing him, for not being, respecting him as an enlightened person, and she was devastated and suicidal. He left her alone in the house.
Sadie Hughes is a woman, you know her?
Sure do.
She says she was seduced by you. You made her mistress. She says you encouraged her to use LSD, tried to make her believe she was possessed by demons, told her she was the only one who could save her from the dark.
She called a friend that came and picked her up and called her family, and they got her on a plane and sent her home. And so I helped her to deconstruct or debrief her about what happened to her, you know, what cults are about, what narcissistic leaders are about, the fact that Lenz didn't appear to be enlightened, and his claim to be enlightened was just a claim to be entitled.
Well, she ran away, that's true. That's about it. This is someone I spent some time with. This is a young woman, a very beautiful young woman who I went out with. And we traveled together for a while and had a great time together. She seemed to have an obsession, as some people do, with demons. It was unfortunate. I liked her very, very much. I thought she was just super.
That started my career with him, one of his mistresses, and I had exit counsel of about 5 other mistresses of his and about 20 other members.
What were the greatest challenges in deprogramming a devoted follower of Lenz?
Yeah, so the difficulty is just getting the whole conversation started. And once a person realizes that it's all about their choice, you know, they can stay in the group forever if they wish to, for every reincarnation, or they could, you know, talk it out and see what I had to say or what the ex-member I had with me had to say. You know, over time, in most of those cases, by the 3rd day, the person is ready to defect from the group.
Joe was often joined in these interventions by former students of Lenz, many of whom Joe had exit counseled himself. And when they weren't assisting in deprogrammings, these ex-followers could be found protesting outside of Lenz's seminars. Could you describe some of the common characteristics of a Rama student?
Most of them were quite attractive, young, intelligent. They could have been successful in business, you know, higher than average IQ, lower than average IQ about comparative religions and not understanding what Buddhism was really about. So he could fool them as far as that aspect of spirituality and, you know, hungry for either spiritual enlightenment or success.
The unenlightened can only take you to the beach, but they can't bring you across the ocean. God can do that directly, if that's the will of eternity, or God will do that through the voice and the guidance of what we call an enlightened person.
It's this exchange between the narcissist and the hero-hungry person. The narcissist becomes a foil, like a movie that they can watch and feel part of, and they join that guru on this stage. You get kind of caught up in it. It becomes a self-sealing social system, and anything that's critical of that self-sealing social system is considered ignorant or evil or some other thought-terminating cliche that prevents the person from thinking about the criticism.
During television appearances, Joe was often captioned as being affiliated with an organization called the Cult Awareness Network.
You know, this guy is not the head of the Cult Awareness Network. All right, this is a deprogrammer who's hired to do kidnappings for $50,000 a hit.
CAN, as it would be called, formed following the Jonestown Massacre of 1978, when spiritual leader Jim Jones coerced over 900 followers to ingest cyanide in what he called a revolutionary suicide. We cannot afford to forget what happened in Jonestown, said CAN's initial director.
They had annual conferences. The basic function was to disseminate information about controversial groups.
There was a time, if you were worried about your son or daughter being in a cult, you could get help from a small, nonprofit organization called the Cult Awareness Network, or CAN.
One follower of Lenz described the Cult Awareness Network as, quote, utterly vicious people who prey on others' religious freedom. Lenz himself told Newsday that, quote, CAN is to small religious groups what the KKK is to black people.
If anything is a cult, it's the Cult Awareness Network, and I will tell you that. That is a cult.
I think Lenz is an individual who craves power. I think Lenz is an individual who has found how to manipulate people to satisfy his craving for power.
There's an organization that calls itself the Cult Awareness Network, and they put families in touch with kidnappers who go out and grab these people. Sometimes 25 to 50 grand a shot is paid by wealthy parents.
There were only 2 cases that I can recall regarding Lenz, 2 young ladies that began coercively, where the family had kidnapped them and flew me in after securing them to try to talk them to leave Lenz, and both of those cases didn't work, unfortunately. But all the voluntary cases I did with his followers did work.
One of those women was Jennifer Jacobs?
Yes.
They had me locked in this hotel for 11 days until I ring out my belief system. Okay, I am 22 years old. I'm a legal adult. They have no right. They can be concerned all they want, but they have no damn right to kidnap me.
In the September 18, 1992 issue of the Philadelphia Inquirer, a woman named Jennifer Jacobs published a letter to the editor in response to an expose the Inquirer had published the previous week called, "As Guru's Disciples Hit Town, Critics Cry Beware." The author of the expose interviewed Jennifer's parents, and they were quoted saying that since joining Lenz's meditation group, their daughter had stopped speaking to them and, quote, no longer has a sense of humor and has stopped playing the piano, a passion she had since childhood. Jennifer had written to tell her side of the story. Quote, in 1987, my parents paid $25,000 to have me brutally kidnapped, locked in captivity, terrorized and abused for 11 days in a filthy motel, in what was euphemistically called an involuntary deprogramming, end quote. She used similar language in her affidavit, naming her parents as complicit in the kidnapping and Joe as among the 2 deprogrammers.
I read the affidavit.
Mm-hmm.
She accused Can of kidnapping her and holding her against her will in a hotel room for 11 days in an effort to deprogram her. Is there truth to that?
Well, Can of the Cult Awareness Network had nothing to do with it, number one. They didn't hire deprogrammers and they didn't manage them, even though people that did interventions attended CAN conferences and would do some networking, but CAN didn't approve of kidnap deprogramming. So that was wrong. I'm trying to think of, I don't remember if it went 11 days. I think it probably went like a week. She went to a rehab center afterwards, agreeing to go, and which was for ex-cult members, and she escaped from there or left it because it was voluntary, and she went back to the group, and after that, we heard all this negative stuff about the experience.
That is a pompous, self-righteous man, and that is the attitude of the whole Cult Awareness Network.
She was quite angry at her family and at me. I've since met with her after she broke away from Lenz, and we've reconciled all of that.
In 1992, Joe was quoted saying, "I don't recommend coercive situations anymore because there's too much trauma involved for everyone."
Hello, power lovers. I'm here today, on top of the Continental Divide, 11,500 feet up above the Earth. I'm parked by the side of the road. It's around 7:45 in the evening on August 7th. Occasionally a car or truck will roar by. I'm facing some distant power mountains, a suitable place to discuss with you the end of the world.
By the 1990s, Frederick Lenz's career had entered a precarious phase. On the surface, things seemed to be trending in his favor. He published his first novel titled Surfing the Himalayas, the story of a young spiritual aspirant and a Zen master named Fwop, who set out to snowboard their way to enlightenment.
Now, your book is about a lot more than snowboarding. I mean, in this case, The Perfect Ride is really about spiritual enlightenment, isn't it?
Well, snowboarding is spiritual enlightenment. Snowboarding is the fastest growing sport in the world, and in 5 years there are going to be more people on snowboards than on skis. But yes, you're absolutely right. Snowboarding is about balance.
The novel sold 90,000 copies. It was even publicly endorsed by Chicago Bulls head coach Phil Jackson, who quickly withdrew the blurb after backlash from the Chicago Tribune. The sequel, Snowboarding to Nirvana, also sold well. In Rolling Stone, after reading the latest coverage of Pearl Jam's battle with Ticketmaster, and flipping past all the ads for CD subscription services, readers would find Lenz's face, with 2 full-printed pages dedicated to promoting the new Zazen album. There's also what must have seemed a reassuring amount of web-hosted fan pages that appeared around this time, but Lenz's reputation at large only continued to plummet. In 1993, ex-follower Mark Laxer released a memoir called Take Me for a Ride. The book details how Lenz convinced his students that Sri Chinmoy couldn't actually achieve samadhi, the deepest state of meditation in which union with the Supreme is reached, and had only been faking it for clout. And how Mark and other male students were dissuaded from even speaking to the women in the group for fear of bringing down their energy, while Lenz himself was privately pursuing them. Laxer's impetus for leaving the group was the passing of a student named Donald Cole, who'd named Lenz in the note he left behind. Cole had been among the 400 students purged by Lenz for, quote, maintaining an abysmal level of consciousness.
There were times where he irrationally, these were people, 300 or 500 people, who'd be giving him tens of thousands of dollars, constantly. And he would just get rid of half of everyone. He would just, wipe everybody out.
Sometimes the spiritual teacher will literally kick out some of their best students because it's time for them to go out and experience for a while in the world. Sometimes a student just isn't doing well. They're knocking their head against the wall. Well, if you're a good teacher, you don't let them keep knocking their head against the wall. They hurt themselves. You send them out for a while.
People would be sobbing.
Lenz was simultaneously threatening to use his spiritual energy against students who left the group of their own accord.
It is possible that he could give me cancer, or as I'm driving late at night alone, my car just might flip.
Do you know how Lenz would dissuade his followers from leaving his group?
Well, there was a lot of dark forces out there, according to him, and that without his protection, you will fall into insanity, your life will collapse, you won't have a chance for enlightenment for many lifetimes.
Now that you're sort of connected with his energy spiritually, if you were to leave, your body is so kind of addicted or connected that you would quickly fall into the lower levels, kind of the hell levels of existence, in which case you'd go crazy, you'd get cancer, you'd get into a car accident.
About 3 years out of the group, I still believed he could do that. He could stop my heart, he could cause a car accident.
But the 1990s saw Lenz's opposition ramping up as well. Ex-students managed to get his novels dropped from Barnes & Noble promotional events, and reports surfaced of a group of parents called Lenz Watch, who worked synergistically with the Cult Awareness Network in order to find students and connect them with exit counselors.
For more information about Lenz and his followers, you can contact the Cult Awareness Network or a group called Lenz Watch.
I had told my mother, whatever you do, if the Cult Awareness Network gives you a call and tries to convince you that I'm in a cult, just hang up on them. They're going to try to deprogram me and try to get tons of money out of you. And then I walked away and she said, the Cult Awareness Network, that sounds legit. So she called them. And it turns out one of the top cult interventionists or exit counselors lived just 3 towns away or 5 towns away. And I still thought that they were going to be full of shit, but I was like, I might as well listen to what they have to say. My friends are there. My family's there, this guy who's the cult expert, and a few ex-members are all there. And they show me videotapes of Scientology and the Moonies and stuff like that. And I want to say 3 or 4 hours into just talking and learning about mind control and other cults, I had the sensation of popping out of it. It was like, pop. And I looked around and I was like, oh my God, you have no idea the shit I believed. Oh my God. It was like waking up from a year and a half long dream and having the memories of a totally different person. I actually had my stepfather drive down to where my ex-fiance, and she was still in it, drove down after the first day, picked her up, brought her down, and I shared the intervention with her. And so she would pop out of it. She was not as dedicated as I was, but there was still, the mind control going on with her.
In 1996, Dateline NBC delivered a critical blow to Lenz's career. A primetime expose, this time featuring an ex-member of Zazen who was quick to call Lenz out for sharing songwriting credits with the band.
I never, in my definition of composition and writing, saw him write anything.
What does he play?
He doesn't play anything.
The film crew captured a Zazen jam session, showing what Lenz psychically cleansing the music looked like in action.
Now let's go on the up, so the way down.
funky. Funkier.
He was apparently using a lot more drugs. I mean, he used LSD, uppers and downers, and from one inside person told me he had also been using cocaine. And he looked ill. The last time he was on television was on Dateline program. He was very thin.
I got this Caucasian body, and it's created all kinds of problems in the West. I've never had one before. It's a new experience. I'm used to being shorter and being in a land where I am understood.
He wasn't as effective as an influencer the last couple of years, and I think a lot of followers began to break away from him.
The segment also featured a newly defected Jim Picariello, who at times seemed stunned by his own story as he recounted it.
I thought, this guy can turn the room into gold. I was pretty much into it at the beginning of the dinner. By the end of the dinner, I was willing to hang out with that group for pretty much the rest of my life. Over time, not only did I see him turn the room gold, which I saw every single time during a retreat, a desert retreat, I saw him at night skate on beams of light, over the sand. Oh, I saw him disappear. I've seen him turn into a woman, into a prince, into this weird bug-like creature. I've seen him levitate. In the very beginning, what did they do? They had us get into a trance state by meditating. And then they would talk about what the experience is when you're with a enlightened being and you are spiritually sensitive. A, you want to be spiritually sensitive. You want to be better than other people. You're a person. B, you're interested in being with an enlightened master because how cool would that be? You're a special person who's learning stuff that no one else is learning. You're in a room with 300 people that believe this guy's enlightened. You've got the group dynamics that are shaping your experience. And then when he comes out and he lowers the lights and gets you into a state and you have a belief like, I want to be special. I want to follow someone who's special. Start experiencing what they described historical enlightened beings are like. And I saw gold.
In the early spring of 1998, Long Island police pulled the body of Frederick Lenz from the bottom of a bay located behind one of his New York homes. A local reporter described a small crowd of onlookers who'd gathered to watch the scene, and a leading hypothesis that Lenz had been killed by the parent of a student, someone who'd felt Lenz had, quote, brainwashed their kids. Adding to this theory was a section of damaged railing along the pier where it was determined Lenz entered the water. But when the body was recovered, they found Lenz dressed in a Versace suit with a dog collar buckled around his neck.
The Scotty dog had died years before named Vayu, and he had that dog collar on his neck. He claimed that Vayu was his most enlightened student and that they had been together many times in past lives. I mean, this is how delusional he was.
Inside Lenz's home were 2 other Scottish Terriers and 1 student. The dogs were in critical condition, having eaten Valium that was hidden inside their dog food. The student had also taken lethal amounts of barbiturates and was found staring at a framed photo of Lenz with a note beside her that read, "We all tried to go to the other world last night, and only Rama made it. Please help us make it to the other world."
The woman was discovered by the housekeeper when she came in, and she got help and survived this overdose, and so did the dogs, by the way.
After a toxicology report found that Lenz had ingested 150 tablets of Valium mixed with vodka prior to drowning, his death was deemed self-inflicted.
Beyond this world, beyond other worlds, be they interdimensional worlds or physical worlds, there is something else, which is that vast unknown that we call eternity. It is where we have come from. It is that which is within us, and it is where we eventually return. I can't tell you what that is like. I have meditated and experienced that. I have tasted it and felt it. Then I went beyond that to become it.
The widespread reactions of followers to Lenz's death have mostly been lost to time, but archived message boards show students sharing photos of group memorials and a sudden urgency to reconnect with other members they might not have seen in years.
Oh, I actually found out about his death at my wedding. I was walking around with my friend Bob, who was involved in my intervention, and we're walking around. He goes, "Oh, what did you think about Lenz dying?" And I was like, "What?"
I was just surprised that he tried to kill other beings, which is so un-Buddhist.
I was like, okay, well, one less cult leader in the world. I was in my mid-20s. I didn't have a lot of empathy for incredibly abusive sociopaths.
Hi, my name is Rama, and today I would like to teach you how to meditate.
Lenz never groomed a successor to lead the meditation group in his absence. On the contrary, he'd been adamant that none of his students had come close to achieving a level of consciousness that could be called enlightenment.
So when my friends write me and tell me they're enlightened, it's like someone who's just taken a second-year French course announcing that they've just completed their PhD.
So the group continued without a living figurehead. Today, the few remaining and incoming students have virtual meetups to discuss Lenz's teachings or to watch his favorite movies. Some meditate on framed portraits of him they keep in their homes. Others simulate his golden light with augmented reality. And clips from his VHS tapes will occasionally appear while scrolling YouTube shorts.
When you meditate over a period of time, you'll come to see more and more of the many faces and sides of creation. And in this one brief lifetime, you can experience ecstasy thousands and thousands of times.
Why do you think someone like Rama, even after all these years, still has a loyal fan base?
There are other groups that are selling his cult. One of the ones that's most successful these days is run by a guy that calls himself Samvara, who's a Lenz offshoot, or a Rama offshoot. His real name is Jeff Malone, Geoff Malone. And his group's called the Buddha Dojo, and it was called Awakened Mind at one time. But it's very Lenz-like. When people approach that group, they don't know that Lenz is behind it, and they might never know. But once you get deeply involved, then it's revealed that Lenz is the guru. It's just like in his day, there's seekers out there that want to believe that there's people out there that are enlightened, and they think that if they come across one, they'll recognize this person. They all use this line, when the seeker is ready, the Buddha will appear. And that line, that slogan has probably gotten more people into bizarre cults, at least Eastern groups, than any other, because people in their own narcissism think that they will have this insight or this psychic power to recognize a real guru when they see one.
It was Lenz's will that his net worth, which included several houses and cars totaling around $18 million, be used to establish a charity in his name with the objective of, quote, disseminating Zen Buddhist teachings, meditation, and yoga in the context of what I have taught as American Buddhism. The Frederick P. Lenz Foundation for American Buddhism still exists today and claims to give millions to Buddhist-friendly causes across the world. In 2013, a follower named Liz Lewinson crowdfunded $29,000 in order to write a biography of Frederick Lenz, titled Gaze in My Direction.
It was New Year's Eve, 1998, and he said to me, "You will be my biographer." 3 months later, he was gone. He staged his exit.
Lewinson's account of Lenz covers much of the same time period as Mark Laxer's memoir, but the tone couldn't be more different. She describes the change of stage names as Lenz incarnating into the Hindu god Rama.
I don't like calling him Rama. It's an insult to those who actually follow either Hinduism or Buddhism.
And Lenz's reasons for breaking away from Chinmoy having largely to do with Chinmoy's strict rule of celibacy.
I went through terrible times. I went through times of self-hate, thinking how undeveloped spiritually I was. Everyone else in the ashram, 1,000 people, nobody had a girlfriend or a boyfriend. I did.
Sri Chinmoy never had the reputational downfall that Lenz experienced. Around the time of Lenz's death, the Chinmoy centers around the world were celebrating the completion of 7 million bird drawings. Chinmoy's students continued performing endurance challenges throughout the decades. By the 1990s, powerlifting had become Chinmoy's preferred method of demonstrating the supreme. Whether he was calf raising a helicopter or an elephant, or wrist curling a giant dumbbell, he always kept the cumulative weight prominently displayed for the audience to consider.
Go, Guru, come on. Up. Yes.
Occasionally, he would combine his creative miracles for a show-stopping finale.
Over close to 1,500 books. It gives you just a brief idea of how prolific Guru is. He has written close to 1,500 different books.
Chinmoy's sheer quantity of creative output has always been seen as dubious by those outside of his meditation centers. And some of his more outlandish feats, such as this lift listed at over 7,000 pounds, were difficult for even his most loyal adherents to believe. But Chinmoy had a seasoned defense. "I don't blame people who suspect my performance," he said. "My own mind suspects it." When Chinmoy passed away in 2007 at the age of 76, the way he was eulogized in the media couldn't have been more different from that of Frederick Lenz. Then in 2015, 13 ex-followers converged to form a YouTube channel called the Sri Chinmoy Disciple Experience.
And, it's very scary and very daunting, especially when you hear all the horror stories that Guru used to tell. Sri Chinmoy used to say, if you leave the center, you're going to wind up, you're going to get raped, you're going to get cancer, the hostile forces are going to capture you.
That was like my only family because I had to cut off my real family for 21 years. I just had pretty much resigned myself that was it for this life. Many times Guru said, it's just one incarnation. And I thought to myself, okay, fine, I can just give one incarnation for this.
Being in the meditation center was very much about trying not to be human. Certain parts of the being, like between here and everything else was meant to be dead.
Started out by having me sit in front of him and meditate. And then he was like saying, are you surrendered? And I had my hands full and I said, Supreme, I bow to thee. And then he was like, oh, are you really surrendered? And then he said, take your clothes off.
Unconditional surrender to the will of the Supreme.
The last development of the story of Frederick Lenz came in 2021, when the remains of Brenda Kerber, a programmer and meditation student who disappeared in 1988, were recovered. Her car had been driven into a reservoir, an act that police ruled intentional. She'd given up custody of her kids before her disappearance, and her diary entries indicate it was so she could move across the country to follow Lenz, who she referred to as Golden Boy.
So the Cult Awareness Network seems to have dissolved in the late 1990s. Can you talk about what happened?
So Scientology was one of the groups that really went after any group that criticized them and especially hated the Cult Awareness Network. They sued the CAN group 50 times.
I got hit with 12 suits in 1 week. I would open the door, a process server would give me a suit. They were suing us all over the country, sometimes simultaneously.
There was a case in the early 1990s where a deprogrammer named Rick Ross took on a case in West. It was a fundamentalist Christian group where he exit counseled teenage sons of a woman out of a group, and then she wanted her then 18-year-old son exit counseled also, and it didn't work. He had been kidnapped. He went back to the group. Scientology got a hold of the young man and got him to run a lawsuit against the Cult Awareness Network based on the fact that Rick Ross had some vague connection to CAN, even though he didn't attend the meetings. Scientology's lawyers were quite adept at this kind of case, where CAN didn't have good representation because it was poorly funded and they couldn't afford a good legal team. Scientology won the case. They bankrupted CAN, the bankrupted group had to sell its assets. The only top bidder was Scientology, so Scientology purchased CAN in 1996. So whenever you call one of those old Cult Awareness Network numbers in those books, you would end up talking to a Scientologist.
What are you going to do when they're trying to destroy you? Look, if you're a Jew, if you're a Jew, no Jew is going to cry about the fact that the Nazi Party is gone. If you're an African American, no one's going to cry that the KKK is gone. I'm not crying because CAN is gone.
Yeah.
Deprogramming still happens across the country, although it's rare to find cases labeled as involuntary after the 1990s.
I still do cases. The last case I did, intervention case, was in India. It was flown over there in September, and that case turned out fine.
Many ex-Rama students still appear to be in the computer programming industry. One former student is quoted as saying, "I don't agree with how he treated women. I don't think he was enlightened, whatever that is. What I did get from him was a career." Others have turned their experience into cautionary tales.
After leaving Lenz's organization, I didn't get cancer. I didn't get into a car crash. Since then, I've had a number of companies as an entrepreneur that I started, and I moved up here to Maine, and I built my own house with my wife. We just read books on how to build a house, and we did it. And in the last 10 years, I've rediscovered a love for filmmaking and screenwriting. I wrote a bunch, including the one I had mentioned before about two people falling in love as they try to save each other from their respective cults. It's a dark rom-com called The Cult of Us.
But there may always be a market for the mystique of enlightenment as defined by those who claim to have achieved it, and in a reality where only they can teach it.
Someone might say, oh, yes, Rama, wonderful, he's an enlightened teacher. But gosh, I just don't feel comfortable with him. I feel more comfortable with beep. With someone else, whose name we won't mention. Why won't I mention it? Well, you have to do some work. I mean, there has to be some adventure here. Part of the test, at least to get in, is that you have to find them. It's hide and go seek. And then you have to believe them. I mean, I could just be making all of this up. Maybe I'm not enlightened. Maybe it's an extra double bluff where I'm just saying all this so you'll just think that I am. You see? Who can tell? You can tell. You can tell and your heart can tell.
A big thanks to Jim Picariello and Joe Zimhart. I wouldn't have been able to present this story nearly as comprehensively without their openness to sharing their experiences.
All day long, from morning until night, I thought about this dude.
Check out the links in the description to find Joe's YouTube channel, where he continues the cult monitoring work he's been doing for decades, and Jim's short films, which have won many awards in independent film festivals. I also want to give a shout out to a YouTube channel called Slave Obeys. Without their efforts in archiving these talk shows from the 80s and 90s, important information about these groups would have been lost to time. And this isn't the first video of mine in which I've used archival clips from this channel, so a shout out is long overdue. Lastly, if you enjoyed this video and would like to support the channel, my merch can be found at atrocityguide.com. Or you can support me directly on Patreon, where you'll get access to my Discord server as well as written progress reports on upcoming videos.